In other markets, purchasing power can sometimes be higher. That item that you sell for £100 in the UK, you might be able to sell for $150 in the US. If you have the right, FX infrastructure, you work with WorldFirst and you're able to settle locally, actually you can just make more money.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of Selling Strategies. Today I'm here with Lawrence from WorldFirst. Let's dive straight into it. Lawrence, take it away.
Sounds great. Well, pleasure to be here. My name's Lawrence. I'm the new country manager for WorldFirst in the UK. So WorldFirst is a UK company. It was started nearly 20 years ago. It has since grown quite significantly. It is now everywhere in the world. It's been acquired by a giant fintech group called Ant International. And ultimately what we do is what we set out to do, which is that we help tens or actually now hundreds of thousands of e-commerce merchants all over the world to grow and operate internationally. We do that by, firstly, we enable them to pay suppliers all over the world using whatever currency their suppliers wish. We allow them to collect currencies all over the world as if they were locals, depending on where they're trading, and they can, again, hold and convert and do whatever they wish with their currency in the interim. So that is what we do. That's what we've always done. And now we just do it at very, very big scale.
Super helpful, super necessary for businesses.
Absolutely.
So Lawrence, what makes right now the right time for sellers to go global?
I think the biggest reason why sellers make that leap into going global is almost invariably they want more growth. They feel like they're slowing down in their home market. They want to tap into new markets that are growing faster than theirs. And that is very, very true now. Your ambitions for how quickly you want to grow may not match with the kind of passive growth of the UK e-commerce market. So that's always a reason, and that's always true. There are a couple of things I think are quite timely as well around why now might be a good time to look at international expansion. One of those things will be around the opportunity to expand your margins. They have got compressed very, very heavily across the board the last few years, and actually in other markets, purchasing power can sometimes be higher. That item that you sell for £100 in the UK, you might be able to sell for $150 in the US. If you have the right, FX infrastructure, you work with WorldFirst and you're able to settle locally, actually you can just make more money on that transaction. So there's a margin piece. And I think in terms of timeliness, there's a third one as well, which is becoming increasingly critical, which is around diversification. So internationalization, not just for growth, but also for resilience within your business. If you only have one market where you have buyers, then you are totally dependent on that market.
And at risk.
Totally at risk, right? Think about the amount of change we've seen recently politically, even in the UK, which is about stable as and boring as it gets a lot of the time. There's been a lot of stuff that's happened here the last few years. We've seen crazy currency fluctuations even the last year with the US. Whatever happens here, whether it's consumer taste or whether it's the economy and politics, you are at risk there. So the more you spread the countries and the more you spread your business, the less at risk you are from any one behaving strangely at any given point in time.
Less risk, less stress. That's
less risk, less stress. Yes, exactly. And more growth,
Yes.
So yeah, the perfect combo.
Win-win.
Exactly.
From your perspective, which of the emerging markets are showing the most promise and why?
People are starting to dabble more and more with the emerging markets. To say that the traditional path for an e-commerce seller in the UK was to sell domestically and then maybe to sell with bits in Europe and then maybe sell to the US if you're feeling really, really, really ambitious.
Yeah.
But, there are very, very large, very interesting, very fast-growing economies outside of those three, which you can increasingly start to sell into. So whether it's UAE and the wealth there and the average ticket sizes and the demand for UK brands, whether it's kind of Southeast Asia where super growth economies, really strong marketplace presence, so it's easy for you to kind of enter. And there's things around slightly more aligned but less traditional ones for countries to expand to, like Australia and Canada, where it's all based on common law. We increasingly have trade agreements now, and so there is the ability to sell into those markets quite quickly. And then the elephant in the room, which is China.
Yes.
So if you are feeling really, really ambitious, it's hard to crack. But it's bigger than every other e-commerce market in the world combined. So if you can access Chinese buyers to sell your products, you will sell more than you can possibly imagine. But it's hard. But it's doable.
Yes, it's not impossible.
It's not impossible. There's a company I came across recently called Yasso who help UK SMB e-commerce merchants to sell into China.
Oh, wow.
Which is cool. It's a cool idea. I think people are starting to try and find ways in just because of the sheer size and scale of the market. Exactly. You can't ignore it, but it's not as easy as just, flicking the Amazon switch and suddenly sales start flying.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is now's the time to try something new, and there's loads of new places to go into.
For sure. And you know, if you think beyond Europe and maybe the US, then maybe you've got an advantage there, because most people don't.
There's loads of opportunities.
There's loads of opportunities, yeah.
What are the early indicators that a seller is ready to expand internationally?
The one that people most commonly are driven by is they feel like they're hitting a bit of a ceiling where they are now. So, you know, they are operating in the UK and their sales are slowing. Either they feel like they've fished out the pond, which is probably not true, or just, you know, the market's not moving as quickly as they'd like. That's usually the kind of a push. You know, it's a bit of a push factor. There's a piece for, you know, people who are really kind of smart and data centric, where if you start to see indicators, so you start to see, you know, you're monitoring your website traffic, and suddenly it's like, why are people coming over from Canada all of a sudden? You know, why suddenly?
How did these guys end up here?
Exactly. You know, I'm not even trying, and 30% of my sales are from the US. That's a common refrain. So like there's things around picking up on early indicators and seeing, you know, emerging demand and then doubling down on it. That's something which, you know, is definitely worth thinking about. And I guess the third one, which is more of just like a thing to kind of bear in mind, is that you kind of do need to have some sort of more stable foundation.
Okay.
You know, if you've sold, you know, 5 units in the UK, is now the time? Maybe not. You don't need to have IPO'd. Like, you know, there's somewhere in between here. You need a solid foundation, but like probably sooner than you might think.
Yeah, you don't need to wait 5 years into your business to try something new.
Not necessarily, no.
That's fantastic. Thank you. What's the biggest financial mistake brands make when selling internationally?
One big one that people make a lot is kind of just assuming that their bank is going to handle everything. So you have a bank, most likely it's the bank that you had as a consumer, probably the bank that your parents had as a consumer, you know, and they'd be like, okay, fine, well, they'll help, they'll handle things. They might do, but e-commerce, merchant, small scale FX is at best an afterthought for most of the banks. So even if they can help you, odds are it's not going to be a great experience for you or your customers or, you know, anyone involved. So there is a thing here of take a view of what you're trying to achieve and who can help you from a kind of, you know, a multi-currency account infrastructure point of view, from an FX point of view. Hopefully it's WorldFirst. There are others who do it, but, you know, we are very good at this. Exactly. So, you know, that's kind of a big one. I think people don't make enough use of a timing advantage, which is, you know, the ability to time your currency. So, you know, being able to hold currency, being able to wait until the markets are advantageous or that, you know, and things move your way for being able to convert. And so being too eager to, you know, you get some euros, you change them automatically, even if you don't need to, is not necessarily the best thing to do. There's a piece around not localizing your payment flows enough. So you're not, you keep your again, same thing, you keep your bank account. And so therefore you try and receive your newfound money into your existing bank account. And lo and behold, you get delayed or you get blocked because, you know, your UK Barclays account or your UK bank account doesn't necessarily fit with, you know, the marketplace you're selling on or the market you're selling into. It doesn't necessarily tie. So, and there is some kind of fundamental pieces around the financial infrastructure you should probably have in place. But then there's the kind of piece around like thinking through your relationship with the consumers in the market you're in. You know, are you sufficiently localized? And I don't mean that necessarily from a financial services point of view, but do you have a good understanding of your competition in that market, where the price point is in that market for you, what forms of payment, you know, you are expected in that market, you know, what their expectations are around returns, around delivery times. It may very well not be the same.
Yeah.
You know, you look across the market just to Germany, all of those things are quite different than they are in the UK. So that's a common mistake.
In location, not that far away, but in terms of everything else, in terms of e-commerce.
Well, you go to Germany or even the Netherlands, you know, anywhere in Northern Europe, and suddenly, you know, the biggest form of payment is invoice terms. So the ability to, you know, you pay for your item in 30 days. You know, no one here does that. So like, it's completely, you know, people who would find it bizarre, but like that is the biggest form of payment and completely demanded by 30-ish% of buyers in e-commerce. So it's not just a case of, you know, whacking your listing into Google Translate and turning it to German. Like there is a degree of understanding the market that is required.
Prepping. Prepping is a big key theme that I'm hearing.
Prepping. I mean, you don't need to get carried away, but like, you know, there's a bit of cursory research required. Yeah.
How can using a service like WorldFirst improve profitability in cross-border sales?
The ability to receive money as a local is a big one. So if you're, you know, selling on Amazon and you start selling into Europe and you get paid in euros, which is great. But, you know, you get paid, if you work with someone like WorldFirst, you get paid the exact euros that you sold. They get transferred in as if you're a local euro seller. And then you can decide when and if you want to convert them to pounds
Yep.
Equally, you could say, actually, I've got some costs in Europe, so I'm just going to pay my European supplier or pay my European market agency or whatever it is with the euros that I've earned. And there's no FX involved. So you're saving yourself unnecessary conversions, unnecessary time, which is huge. And so, and as you add more currencies and more markets, you just become a more global company. You are holding currency in multiple markets, and you're not having to constantly just convert everything to a UK bank account for a fortune and then pay it out again for a fortune, which is what a lot of companies do. And it's super inefficient and really, really damaging to margins.
Yeah, and look after the pennies and the pounds will look after themselves, right?
Exactly. It's very easy to be like, how much am I buying for? How much am I selling for? And you end up with a margin of maybe sub 10%, and then you're paying 4% to your bank for a fee you didn't even know existed. So, it's
all
more
these hidden costs.
Exactly, and it's more than pennies. It's often a margin for an e-commerce company. Like, that's your difference between being profitable and being not. So there's a big one there, and there's a piece around being able to pay suppliers in their preferred currency. Being able to do it quickly. There's a huge thing of where do you source your goods? In the UK, it's probably often China, not always these days, but often China.
Yeah.
And they want dollars or they want RMB. In fact, increasingly seeing that they'll give you a discount if you'll pay them in RMB, but your bank's not going to pay somebody RMB. So by working with companies like WorldFirst, you're able to pay suppliers, yes, quickly, but also at a much more efficient rate, and they'll get the money quicker. We've had so many stories of supplies sitting on the docks waiting for funds to clear for a day, 2 days, 3 days, a week. Our funds will typically clear in hours or instantly if they already work with us. So there's a big piece there around speed, efficiency, cost that comes with paying suppliers as well.
And time is money.
And time is money, especially if you're suppliers. They don't mess around. They don't mess around. Like they'll move on. Like they know. So.
You don't need that email in your inbox.
Exactly.
Are there any common myths around currency conversion that you'd like to clear up?
I think the big one in anything to do with foreign exchange or finance or even payments is that it's all the same. Like, it makes no difference. Like, it's a race to the bottom. It's a cost. There's no difference to any of them. And it's not true. It's not completely not true either. But FX providers are not all the same. There's some hide money in spreads. Some are more transparent than others. Some are faster than others. Some have more options than others. So I wouldn't assume that just because you have access to some foreign exchange elements here that it's all the same, and it doesn't matter. It does, especially when you get maybe a little bit bigger or have slightly more advanced needs, and you start, again, scary terms, but start having to think about hedging. So the ability to fix currency rates, that is something which is not uncommon, but certainly not every FX company by any means does it or does it well. But it's super important, your ability to protect your business when you have, a bit more scale and, a bit more kind of complicated needs.
Yeah.
So that's a big one.
Definitely do that research before jumping straight in just to anyone.
Yes, exactly. I think that's one more myth, is that ultimately things like foreign exchange and, or your ability to construct your accounts, they don't matter unless you're massive. There's just it's pennies, and really it doesn't matter. Unless you're doing 50, 100 million a year, it's really, really not true. Even if you're making a supplier payment of a few thousand pounds to somebody in China, with somebody like WorldFirst, that might run you, £50 ish, depending. That could be hundreds of pounds, if you're using a bank, and again, multiply that by the amount of money, the amount of time you're spending £10,000, or then you're collecting money, and then you're kind of, it can run to thousands of pounds, and it can, like I said before, a 4% fee can often be the difference between a profitable sale and a not profitable sale. So it can really, really, really bite at profit margins. So it's not just about fractions of a percentage on tens of millions of dollars of trade. That is a thing, but it is something that all businesses need to think about from pretty much day one to some extent.
And it's money that businesses can invest elsewhere. Why waste it there?
Exactly.
Right? They can invest it in other areas of their business.
Exactly.
I have one last question for you. What's one piece of advice you'd give to a UK-based seller looking to launch in, let's say, Mexico? Okay,
so Mexico specifically, it's a great market. The ability to it's growing super quickly. I think it's one of the the fastest growing markets on for a lot of the marketplaces out there, and it has a massive marketplace presence. eBay's going really big there. I think Amazon's quite big there. Mercado Libre has got a really strong presence there. So start with marketplaces. You know, you've got a really strong marketplace base there, so start selling marketplaces. You know, also start thinking about how you can leverage the fact that you then have pesos in your multi-currency account.
Yes.
So, you know, you can start to collecting more currencies, and actually there is a time quite possibly where you can exchange that very easily, very quickly, very cheaply for dollars, because that currency moves in such a way, and then suddenly you've got dollars that you can then use to pay your supplier. So there's a few things around that, but I think they say start small, start easy, start with marketplaces. It's a great way to test the market, and start to think about how the new currencies that's bringing into your business can potentially save you costs and kind of help you become more global.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. Some great insights for our sellers watching this today. It's been absolutely wonderful. I can't wait to have you on here again.
Love to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.